Thanks, JJ, and thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to sit down this morning with a truly great leader, a leader that John M. Huntsman himself described as the very best dean in the country. I believe that with all my heart. Thank you, Dean Anderson, for being here.
Thank you, Frank. Very honored. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Before we begin, I want to review just briefly a few of Dean Anderson's accomplishments. Since he arrived in 2006, we've grown scholarship support from about $200,000 a year to over $5 million a year. Enrollment has grown from 1,600 students to nearly 3,000. We've built 2 buildings. We've built Huntsman Hall, we've built the Gardner Building. That's $88 million of capital investment. And he's translated all of this to student outcomes, student success. It's remarkable, Dean Anderson. Thank you for all you've done. I'm honored and I'm humbled by the contributions of this legendary leader, Doug Anderson. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. Frank, I just have to say I'm honored by the way you've introduced me, and I'm a little scared and troubled by it because when you get an invitation like that, then you have to try to say something great. So I'm a little worried about that, but I honestly will tell you that it has been a labor of love. The first 10 years of those 20 years was frankly a lot of labor, but the second 10 has all been love. And it's been love because I get to work with the greatest people on behalf of the greatest students in the country. And it just makes life a joy. When you love what you're doing, you don't think of it as a job. You think of it as, what a great life I have. And it's been a great life, which is in part, why I've stayed 20 years. Because, it's been wonderful to see it unfold. But it's time to let a new generation of leaders take over. And so that's why I'm stepping away.
Well, Doug, you've chosen Utah State twice now in your life. Once as a young man, you had recently returned home from a church mission in Germany.
Yeah.
And then later in life, you came back as dean. I'd love it if you could walk us through your thinking. Why did you choose USU over the many other options you had available to you at that time in your life? Can you first tell us about when you were a young man and you chose USU?
Well, USU was part of my heritage. I didn't come here as a freshman, but my father and mother both went to USU, met here. They both grew up in Cache Valley. Mother grew up on a dairy farm out in Benson, and Dad grew up down on the island here in Logan. And my grandmother was born on the same day as USU, March 8th, 1888. And she was born up above Richmond, High Creek. And so on both sides of the family, I was well acquainted with this glorious valley. Although my parents, after they graduated from Utah State, moved to Southern California, and Dad got a doctorate at USC in public administration. I went from kindergarten through high school in Pasadena. Lived in the foothills above Pasadena in Altadena. And when I graduated from high school, I had applied to Utah State, but I had enough scholarship money that I could go to Stanford for a year, and so I did that. And then I went on this mission. On the year I graduated from high school, my parents moved back to Cache Valley. We always talked about Cache Valley as home. And as soon as baseball season was over in the summer, we all came back up to Cache Valley. Dad dropped us off and went back to work at USC, and I got to spend the rest of the summer here in Cache Valley. I absolutely loved it. Loved being a kid in Cache Valley and had so many cousins and everything around here. But when I graduated from high school, they said, maybe it's finally time for us to move home. And the reason for that was Dad took a job with USAID in Vietnam. It was the middle of the Vietnam War, and he was appointed as the national director of the National Institute of Administration, which was a USAID project to help train the civil servants of the government of Vietnam, Republic of Vietnam. So since he was going into a war zone, Mother and Dad thought it was probably best for them to move back to Cache Valley. So when I got home from Germany, I had been away from home for 3 years. I was broke, I was homesick, I did not have the money to go back to Stanford, and I thought, well, I'll go here to Utah State for a year, finish my general education requirements, and then I'll go back to Stanford. So it was kind of a decision of necessity to a certain extent. But what happened was I absolutely fell in love with going to college here at Utah State. It happened very, very quickly. And it was easy for me then to say, well, I'm just going to graduate from Utah State and I'll go back to Stanford for graduate school. But I did get accepted into their PhD program in economics, but I decided to go to Harvard instead.
Now, speaking of Harvard, you were there for many, many years as a student and then as a professor, and then you were minding your own business, running a very successful consulting business when a surprise call came and you chose Utah State again. And you have now blessed the lives of more than 40,000 students because of this second decision to come home. Can you tell us what was on your mind when you made that decision?
Yeah, let me just clarify. I was at Stanford in Cambridge for 15 years, from 1974 to 1989, and most of those years were either working on the PhD or working at Harvard Business School. For the last year of that time, 2 years of that time, I was building this business that you're talking about. And I told my partners when we first started, and they were all ex-Harvard Business School professors, we'd known each other for 10 years or so, that if the business worked out, I was going to move back to Utah in 2 years, and I would run my part of the business from Utah. So that's exactly what happened. In 1989, the family and I moved back here to Salt Lake City, and I then spent from 1989 to 2006 running this business that we had started in 1987 from Utah. In fact, I did almost no work in Utah. Everything else was outside. I think I earned a total of $15,000 between 1989 and 2006 from a Utah-based client. Everything else was outside. And your question was now, how did I make the decision to come up to Utah State?
Yeah. Why'd you come back?
Why did I come back up to Logan? Well, it did mean pretty much giving up my business, which was a hard decision to make. The invitation was completely unexpected. I was serving on the board of trustees of the university. In fact, I was the vice chairman. I thought it was a perfect job, close to the action, no real responsibility. Literally on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in 2005, I get a phone call from the president of the university. He says, Doug, I'm driving up I-15. I've just had a phone call from the dean of our College of Business. She's leaving. She's going to go to Florida State to become the dean there. And I'm just wondering, is there any way we could persuade you to become the new dean? And I was completely out of the blue. I had no idea she was leaving. Hadn't thought about this at all. And I said, gee, I'm terribly honored, but there's absolutely no way. And I had 6 reasons I could give him right off the top of my head why that wouldn't be a great idea. One of which was literally the day before I was with my partners in Boston having our annual off-site strategy meeting, and we had made a decision that had required us to commit each other to staying in the firm for 5 years, because it was a joint decision about an investment that we were making. And in order to make this decision have teeth, we all agreed to escrow a significant sum of money, our own individual money, in the firm. And if any of us left the firm before the expiration of that 5-year period, we would forfeit that money on some kind of sliding scale. This is what made the decision possible for us to make it, because there were some of us who were starting to think about other things. Two of our founding partners had already left. One had gone back to Harvard, one went to Duke. And so we could imagine that there would be others, and nobody wanted to be the guy that turned out the lights. Oh, by the way, this was my decision. I mean, my idea. My partners liked the idea. We had our lawyers write it up as a form of a contract, and we literally face-to-face signed this document not 24 hours before I get this phone call from the president, would you like to be dean? And so my mind was just not open to the probability. But the president said, well, don't say no definitively until you've had a chance to think about it and talk with Kathy, my wife, see what she says. And I agreed. I agreed to think about it for a month. And every time I thought about it, I thought, why on earth did I get this call the day after I signed this document? And it was at Christmas time, I was snowshoeing with a dear friend of mine that I'd known for years, and we sat down by the fire after the snowshoeing experience, and I told him about this. And I said, Larry, heaven can't be in this, because if it were, I would have gotten the decision, a week before, not the day after we signed this document. And he looked at me kind of puzzled and said, that's not how it works. He said, I thought you were smarter than this. He said, it's not whether it's convenient, it's whether it's the right thing to do. And I'm telling you, I've never had a paradigm shift in my mind quite as dramatic as I did that day, except when I fell in love with Kathy. And that's a true story. But it's for another day. And I knew he was right about that. So I talked with the president, and I said, look, I think this would be a great idea, but I just don't know how to do it. Maybe you can help me. And so I told him the dilemma, and he said, that's not a problem. He said, you don't have to be a full-time dean for the first 3 years. No one will ever know you're not the full-time dean because you're going to work more than full-time. But what I'm saying to you is you can have freedom to continue to work in your firm. We'll make it a part of your contract. Because what you do is teaching executives about leadership, strategy, and change, which kind of is what we need you to do at the College of Business. And your relationships will be helpful to us. So he put it in the document that was my letter of contract. And for 3 years, I was less than a full-time dean. And then I met all my obligations to my partners. And then after that, I became a full-time dean.
Well, I don't know another person on the planet that works as many hours a week as this individual. He's called me at midnight before, and we've talked about work.
This says more about you than it does about me. You're the receiver of such a phone call. It's easy for me to make a call like that, but the question is there somebody on the other line?
And every now and again, our good dean goes on vacation. And a couple years ago, he called me and he said, Frank, I'm sitting in San Diego. I got my feet in the sand, and I'm looking out at the ocean, and I'm thinking of you. Well, I'm so flattered, Dean Anderson. What can I do to help you? And then we talked about work for hours. And I said, Doug, shouldn't you be enjoying yourself? And he said, no, I'm fine. And I said, well, where are the grandkids? He said, oh, they're fine. They went for milkshakes. And I said, well, don't you want to go get a milkshake? And he said, no, they'll bring me one back. And anyway, I have many stories, and we've all experienced this.
I apologize.
I actually, in all honesty, when my cell phone lights up and it says Doug Anderson, it causes me to be happy. I truly love our boss.
Oh, you're too much.
Now, in those early days, speaking of those early days, you had an incredible partner, John Huntsman.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the partnership? Can you tell us what kind of man he was?
I knew John a little bit because when Kathy and I got married in 2001, we moved onto his street. Okay, so I became dean in 2006. I had no idea I was going to become dean. So this had nothing to do with that. It just happened to be that the house that we bought was right down the street from John Huntsman's house in Salt Lake City. And of course, I knew who John was. I had met him a couple of times. but not enough to really be intimate with him. But we had met him a couple of times before. Kathy's family knew him well. I knew him less well, but I had met him independently as well. And then when we moved in the neighborhood, he was very welcoming, very friendly, he and Karen, and David, their son, who also lived in the neighborhood, right around the street from us. And we would see John and Karen walking up the street on their morning walk a few times, and chat with them and so forth. That was about the sum total of the relationship that I had with John. I knew his sons a little bit better, and the governor, of course, and admired them greatly. And the governor is the one who actually had appointed me to the Board of Trustees at Utah State. So I was grateful for that. I had no idea that John was thinking about a major gift for the Huntsman School. The president didn't tell me about that until after I became dean. Literally, not after I was announced, but after I became dean, he told me. And he said that he had been talking with Governor Huntsman, and Governor Huntsman had told him that he thought his father had another significant gift in him. And he encouraged him to think about the possibility that it might come to the College of Business. And so the president asked me if I would take the lead on that, and I was very happy to do it. And it was in the process of talking with him and exploring the possibility that we could have a gift that would be of such a magnitude that we would rename the college in his honor. That's where I really got to understand and know about John.
And what kind of man was he?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I've had the privilege of working with some very large size personalities. Yeah. Probably probably the most emblematic of that before I met John Huntsman was Lee Iacocca. Now, this crowd is a little bit younger than I am, so. But few of them will remember Lee Iacocca. And I worked directly with Lee Iacocca in the company that I started. And he was an incredible personality. He could be very intimidating. In fact, one of my roles at working for them was to facilitate a meeting of all the officers of the company and Lee Iacocca in a policy strategy offsite. They had never had that with Lee Iacocca. This was in 1988. They had never had that with him. And he'd been CEO of Chrysler for more than 10 years at that point. They never had such a thing. And these guys, the officers, they were really intimidated. There were some things they wanted to talk about, and they couldn't bring themselves to ask him the question. They asked me to ask him the question, But the other thing about Iacocca was that he was also a very charismatic guy. And if you understood him well, you could talk very candidly with him about it. The particular incidents with Iacocca, Iacocca was about ready to build a $1.5 billion new technology center. And it would be destined to be called the Lee Iacocca Technology Center. They actually did build it in Michigan, out by Pontiac. And the company officers felt like that was too big a budget. And they wanted me to bring that up with Iacocca in this meeting. So I had a chance to visit with Iacocca for about 30 minutes before he came in to meet with the officers. We had been working together for about 3 days at that point. And he said, well, how's it going, Doug? I said, it's going great. We're having fantastic discussions. 2 issues that I'd like to alert you to. And he said, fine, shoot. So I thought I'd take the toughest one first. The toughest one was that we had established a no smoking policy for being in this meeting. And Iacocca, he liked cigars. So I thought that was the hardest decision to bring to his attention. So I said, well, one thing is, Lee, is that we kind of established this principle of no smoking. How do you feel about that? That's no problem. I've already had 3 cigars today. No problem. What's the next one? Well, it's about the technology center. Yeah? Well, they're very excited about it. They're wondering if they could do it for, a little less. How much? I said about 500. I didn't say 500 what? 500 million is what? He says, yeah, we can talk about that. So we went out, came out and started having the meeting, and somehow he starts talking about the importance of reading your mail. Okay, he wasn't talking about email either, This is back in the day. And he talks about getting a letter from one of his members of his board, who happened to be the CEO of RJR Nabisco, which is, of course, a tobacco company. And the letter was that this guy was unhappy about Chrysler's tobacco policy. And then he turns to me, he says, in front of the officer, he says, Doug here tells me I can't even smoke here. And that established their credibility for me with the audience, and it kind of broke the ice. Why am I telling you about that? John Huntsman was a big personality. At his core, and I came to see this, the man had a heart of gold, an absolute heart of gold, one of the most generous, loving people I have ever met, and an incredibly honest person, full of integrity. Those are the 2 defining characteristics that I take away from John Huntsman, and I love him.
Thanks, Dean Anderson. We are also proud to have the Huntsman name. That's our brand. The Huntsman family has given enormous sums of money to help us do all the things that we do, from buildings to student scholarships to faculty. And for that, we're forever grateful. And the name, though, the name is even more important because of what the name stands for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I hope we all remember that I'm not going to diminish the impact of their giving, their dollars. That it has had a transformative effect.
We couldn't have done anything without them.
The fact of the matter, however, is the enduring gift is the brand. And before we had that name, there were a lot of people who wondered, how could the College of Business at Utah State University aspire to greatness? And it changed overnight. It changed overnight with the addition of John's name. I remember one of our colleagues, I won't name who it was, said to me as I was working with John, it was a 17-month period between the time I became dean and the time we announced his historic gift in December of 2007. So we worked together for quite a while to make sure we understood what was going to happen with this gift. And so one of our colleagues said to me one day, "Hey, Doug, don't forget about it. John's not going to. He's not going to give this gift." We knew it would be. We were looking for $20 million. Turns out the initial gift was $26 million. And then, of course, he's added to that substantially. They doubled it again 10 years later and helped us get another $25 million from Koch's influence, very important on that. And then another $6.5 million for this building, and. This colleague said, he gets into a conversation with the university once every 5 or 10 years, and he never does anything. He kicks the tires. He said, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's not going to happen." And I remember the day we had the gift announcement. It was over in the Taggart Student Union. And there were 500 people there. Of course, the governor, his son, was there, and because the governor was there, all the media was there. We had 4 apostles of the LDS Church that were there. The crowd was excited. I happened to run into this colleague just as I was going into the Taggart Student Union. And I said, "Do you hear that sound?" And he said, "What sound is that?" I said, "The sound of eggs cracking." It was one of the great moments of my life.
You've always said that student success is our top priority. A lot of things have changed in the Huntsman School in 20 years, but this never has. You've stuck to this from beginning to end, that student success is our top priority, that our purpose is to be a career accelerator for our students and an engine of growth for our community, the state, the nation, and the world.
Frank, you've got the mantra.
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. But I've heard you say it so many times that it's in my head and always will be. And I'm deeply grateful for that. But tell us about your passion for students.
Well, it's very easy. First of all, it's the experience that I had as a student. Yeah, I would not have accepted a job to become dean and instead of in preference to my business, because I loved my business. It was a great experience, very successful. I loved the people I was working with. But I only would ever have wanted to be dean here. I was actually asked to consider becoming dean at the University of Utah's business school. And I was talked into allowing myself to be considered and allowing myself to go on the campus. I really was not enthusiastic about it. But I spent a day there, met with the faculty, and I can remember I had a moment, this was back in '98. I had a moment where I was by myself in what was then the dean's office. And I stood there in this empty dean's office. I looked around myself and I said out loud, "What am I doing here?" And I was so grateful that they chose the other guy. So I didn't have to decline the invitation. So I came here because of the experience I had here as a student. I loved being a student here, and I loved the experience that I had had in contrast to my experience at Stanford. And let me just tell you that in brief. At Stanford, it was on the quarter system, but I had 4 courses that constituted the full year at Stanford. 3 of those courses, the history of Western civilization, was taught by a graduate student from Berkeley. German was taught by a graduate student from Stanford. English was taught by a graduate student from San Jose State. That only left 1. And of those, 2 of the quarters was taught by a famous biologist. It was the introduction to biology. It was in a cavernous environment. And I never had a single conversation with that professor in the entire 2 quarters. The last one was an introduction to Christian theology taught by an Anglican minister in a seminar, and that was great. Now, I had a wonderful broad life at Stanford. I was the editorial page of the Stanford Daily. I got involved in student politics. I tried to walk on to the Stanford baseball team, which didn't end well because the coach and I had a disagreement. The disagreement was I thought I was good enough. He didn't. Kind of ended things.
That's a hard one to get over.
It was a hard one to get over. I dreamt about that for many years later. Ryan probably had dreams like this too at one place along the way. But, so I had a great experience at Stanford, but it wasn't like Utah State. I came here. Immediately, all of my classes were with professors, people, Yeah.
Well, we've
who actually, some of them were bald, And
we've kept that alive. You've been a talent magnet.
Yeah.
We've hired more than 100 new faculty and staff since 2006. Yeah. Can you tell us about what you've been looking for? So you've made many, many hiring decisions. Every job candidate that comes to the Huntsman School sits down with Dean Anderson for an hour, and he gives them a talk about who we are and what we're all about.
I call it the culture talk.
The culture talk.
I tell everybody who's interested, I said, look, I'm not here to evaluate your technical ability. That's the search committee's done that. Our colleagues have done that. I want you to understand what's different about Utah State. And the reason why is because you need to make an informed decision about whether you feel like you fit. with Utah State, and here's the difference. We are a research university, and at the College of Business, our primary focus is on our undergraduates and their success.
That's what you mean by the word culture.
That's part of the culture. That's a big part of the culture, and it's a big part of the strategy. It's a decision that we've made about how we're going to win. That was really the presenting question that John Huntsman and I talked about, and we needed to be aligned behind that. If he was going to invest all this money, and I was going to invest my time and the rest of my career, we needed to have unity on this theme. And we both agreed 100%, and we came at it individually and separately, that the way to win in the College of Business was by focusing on our undergraduate program. We knew we could do that. Now, I have a master's degree from this college, and I would not have been accepted at Harvard without that master's degree, so I'm not dissing the master's degree program. I am saying that we don't have the resources to have a PhD program. And we were spending a lot of money on we had 2 PhD programs when I came down, and I had to get rid of them. Why? Because we needed those resources for our undergraduates. And we chose that because we knew we could win with the undergraduates. There was just no doubt in our mind. I mean, we had produced a Nobel Prize winner, among others, from our undergraduates. We produced a Frank Caliendo from our undergraduates. And I knew we could do it over and over and over again if we had the resources to do it. Now, that's different than Stanford or Harvard. Stanford and Harvard are great universities because they are great graduate universities. And they use that reputation and that theme as a halo to attract massive numbers of undergraduates, most of whom get excluded from going to those places, and that gives them some cachet. Totally different strategy for this college. We are inclusive. We don't evaluate our prestige by how many people we say no to. We evaluate our prestige by the way in which our graduates enter the workforce after they have been here, and the way in which we have added value to them. And it's amazing what our students, our graduates, are able to accomplish. So you'd think that that would be kind of like a common strategy among higher education. It's not. It's not. And that's what gives us the point of difference and the opportunity. You know, everybody's trying to be like Harvard and Stanford. And we're saying Harvard and Stanford are great. You know, they're great for the graduates of the Huntsman School of Business if they want to go on and get graduate degrees. But that's not how we're going to play this game. We're going to play this game in a way in which we can win, and that means focus on our undergraduates first and foremost, their success, and that will build our brand in the market. Now, you'd say, well, who doesn't say student success is the most important? Everybody says it. The question is, do they do it? You know, we say any mistake made leaning in the direction of our students and their success is a forgivable mistake. Any mistake made leaning in any other direction may or may not be forgivable. We really try to mean it. You know, the problem is, the dirty little secret in higher education is that usually student success comes around number 5 in the priority. You know, the others in front of it are like faculty convenience. Nobody says that, but it's true. Administrative convenience, the athletic program, what the legislature is thinking about, maybe some important alumni. You know, it's either 5 or 6 typically. And we say, no, we've got to keep at it right at the top. And it's amazing if you take student success as your mantra and you're focused on the undergraduate program as the place to build your brand, and then that halo helps you with your master's programs, as long as they're complementary, They don't steal anything away from the undergraduates. It's amazing how powerful that lens is in terms of helping you know what you need to do next.
Thank you, Dean Anderson. That's beautiful. Now I'm going to take you back. In the beginning, you mentioned Kathy.
Yeah.
She's been a secret weapon and a partner to you through this 20-year journey. Always professional, always kind, always full of grace, the lovely Kathy Anderson. Can you tell us what her partnership has meant to you in your journey as dean?
Well, you've described Kathy very, very well. And it was a paradigm shift for me when I met Kathy. I asked her to marry me on our third date.
Third?
Third. Best decision I've ever made. And Kathy has been absolutely a rock in terms of this job. You know, the first 10 years, as I said, wasn't easy. And I would come home and say to Kathy, it's a good thing I don't look for love in the workplace. Not only do I not need to, but I don't get any, you know? And another mantra I would say to her is, you know, I'm just going to draw a big bullseye on my chest, because I was kind of fighting the bureaucracy. You know, I don't know if you all know this, but higher education's a bit bureaucratic, very slow in changing and moving. And when I was running our business for the 19 years before I became dean, my partners and I would get an idea in the morning and would execute it in the afternoon. There are still things today that I noticed in the first 6 weeks that I thought needed to be changed. And I have been working on them that are not yet changed. And then the other thing is we think about success and excellence in this college differently than the other colleges do. Our definition of success and excellence is different. In many of the other colleges, they're trying to be like Stanford and Harvard and Big Ten. You know, they're putting their graduate program first. I don't diss them because I love my colleagues in the other departments, but the fact of the matter is there is a cultural difference between the College of Business and all of the other schools on this campus. And you see it, you know, in subtle and more obvious ways, and sometimes it leads to a bit of conflict. And I experienced that a lot in the first 10 years. Thankfully, the president was very loving in terms and kind in terms of not reacting too quickly about it. There used to be cohorts of people going over to his office saying, "You got to get this guy out of here. He's changing everything." And so I would say to Kathy, I'm going to paint this bullseye on my chest. If they can take me out, that's fine. But I'm not taking myself out. This is my college. This is my university. And I'm sticking. Part of the reason I said that, and I have to say this, do I have time to tell you the story about John Huntsman, the story that made all the difference?
Please do.
Yeah. So I was a bit depressed after the first 2 months of being dean because it wasn't the way I remembered it. You know, I had this great experience myself as an undergraduate and as a master's student. And it seemed to me that we had lost a lot of the vitality and the excitement that we had back in the day. And it was true there were some structural problems that we had. School had been hollowed out. Resources were so few. And people, I think, were just discouraged, and I was discouraged, and because I had seen a fair amount of mediocrity, complacency about being mediocre, self-satisfaction even about where they were, and a what's in it for me attitude, and a failure to really imagine the possibility of greatness. And I didn't give up first-class airfare for mediocrity, to preside over mediocrity. I was a little bit down, and then the Runnin' Utes of Utah came up to Romney Stadium. This was in September, I think 16th of 2006. And they beat us 48-0. Were you there, Ryan, for that one? 48-0. And it was painful. It was like on the second play from scrimmage, our quarterback threw a pick six, 6 turnovers for touchdowns. It was just awful. And then the student newspaper wrote it up and said, the worst defeat in Aggie history. And I felt it myself. I was at the game and it was painful. But it became a metaphor kind of for what I was experiencing. I was thinking about when I was a student. And oh, by the way, not because of anything I did, but our team in Romney Stadium, the year I was a senior, beat Utah, something like 44-16. And the quarterback, Tony Adams, later played for Kansas City, set an NCAA total offense record in the process. So I was using that and using this and thinking about my student experience and what I was experiencing. And it kind of became a metaphor. And so I wrote this memo to the president, and the memo was entitled, "It's 48-0. And if we don't make a big change quickly, we're not going to be able to play in the same league as these guys." And in our business school. And by these guys I meant initially BYU and Utah. And because I was in the conversation with John Huntsman about making a $20+ million gift, I felt I had a fiduciary responsibility to tell John what I was experiencing. And so I did. One night, without asking permission from the president to share this memo, one night, John and David and I got together for an hour, and I gave him the full 48-0 memo in a verbal format. And he listened, both of them listened very carefully, and afterwards they said, John said, "Thank you, Doug, we appreciate this briefing. We would, of course, understood all these things eventually ourselves. You've saved us a lot of time, but I want you to understand something. We're interested in Utah State and its College of Business, not because of where you are today, but because of where we think you can become, what we think you can become with our help." I'm telling you, that was a moment that I will never forget, because that's the moment that I knew I had a partner. And I knew I had somebody in addition to Kathy. Kathy I knew was going to be with me, but now I knew I had John. And I had John for the rest of the time he was alive. Fortunately, we got 10 years from that moment, 10 years plus 2 months, almost exactly, December 3rd, 2007 to 2018, February 2nd. And those 10 years were absolutely the building years of this strategy, and the rest of the time we've just been continuing to add momentum. And I am so proud of the colleagues that we have in this college. People often say, give me a lot of credit for it. The fact of the matter is, Frank, you and all of our colleagues and all of our National Advisory Board members and so many people in the community are now invested in this college and have created a culture that if we keep this culture alive, keep our focus clear about it, and keep growing and investing and learning and changing and attracting good talents, it will be sustainable, and it will continue to make and increasingly make the kind of impact we dreamed possible.
Thank you, Dean Anderson. We've come to the end of our time. It's been a wonderful hour to spend with you. We've got 2 things here. First, JJ, I want everybody to see what I can see. JJ, would you come on up here for a minute? JJ is our business senator, and he's got some unusual socks on right now. Hop up on the stage. Can you guys see these socks?
Oh, my gosh.
They are Doug Anderson socks. JJ, you can stay right there, buddy. Thank you, Julia. We have a gift for you.
Oh, my
Dean
goodness.
Anderson.
Thank you.
It's one of our favorite pictures of Doug. He's got such a handsome profile. But he's sitting here contemplative, and he's thinking about what matters to him. And I'm going to read you this quote. Of course, you can see it on the screen, but it says, "The young people who place their hopes for the future in our hands are some of this nation's finest. Humble, curious, eager, honest, hardworking, and grateful. They are our greatest asset." This is your legacy, Dean Anderson, your focus on students. Thank you for that gift to students and to us.
Thank you, Frank.
Oh,